There's an ancient question in right-wing circles and in history and in communist circles, and it's the question of whether the Bolshevik movement was either entirely, overwhelmingly, primarily, or partially Jewish. Which one of these things was the Bolshevik movement? And if you read certain people, certain far right people, they will say that the Bolshevik movement was 90% Jewish, 75% Jewish. Other sources, some that I've read that were NATO funded, USAID funded, probably United Nations funded too, say that the representation of Jews in the Bolshevik Party was no greater than their population in the Russian Empire. So the Russian Empire was somewhere between 2 and 6% Jewish, probably a little bit less than 4. Most of those people would have been living in modern day Poland and Belarus, and they say that Jews in the Bolshevik Party are just, somewhere between 1.5 to 6%, which is what you would expect based on their population. Now, since I'm interested in communism and I'm interested in ethnic politics, this is one of the most important questions of ethnic and racial politics of the 20th century, and therefore the world that we're living in right now. So, before we begin, and before I show you my results on looking into this question for myself with no help from anyone else, I would like you, the viewer, the listener, to think in your own mind, what proportion of the party do you think is Jewish, as opposed to, let's say for instance, Russian, which is the dominant ethnic group of Imperial Russia and Russia today? Probably somewhere between 70 and 85% of the subjects of the Russian Empire were Great Russians, as they're called. We would think of them just as Russians. Also, there's Ukrainians and Belarusians, so these are the other two types of the East Slav. The Ukrainians were probably 30 millions or something like that, so maybe they're another 10 or 15% of the Russian Empire, maybe even more. And then you have all the other ethnic groups, such as Poles, all of the Central Asians, the various Muslim people in Central Asia and the Transcaucasus area. So there's a lot of different ethnic groups in Russia. So you have to decide personally for yourself before we get started, what is the representation of Jewish people in the Bolshevik Party? Just quickly, what we commonly think of the Bolsheviks, there was a split in something called the Russian Social and Democratic Labor Party, the RSDLP. It split into two factions, Bolshevik and Menshevik. Some of the Mensheviks participated in the Russian Revolution, some didn't. The Bolsheviks found support from another group that were called the SRs, or left SRs, the Social Revolutionaries. A lot of those people were involved early on, but they walked out because of disagreements with the Bolsheviks. So we're talking about within the whole constellation of left politics within late imperial Russia, the Bolsheviks only represent one part of that. Okay, so the way that I went about doing this, so form your idea. Is it 1%? Is it 5%? Is it 50%? Or 100%? What I did was I got some historical documents, and of course we're never going to know the membership of the Bolshevik Party down to the last person. It's kind of ridiculous to think that we could ever know that. I think there were something like 20,000 people at the time of the revolution in October. And of course, very quickly after that, it swells up to 200,000 and then into the millions. But so we have a base of about 20,000 people in the party. And there's no way we're going to know about the rank and file. The only thing that we can do, the only thing that we can use historical records to help us find out is the leadership. So, what we're talking about is, what is the Jewish representation in Bolshevik leadership? Definitional questions are always really difficult. So, what are we going to consider leadership? Well, it's going to be people who get their names mentioned in important party documents. This is requiring no historian to go through this for us. We're just doing it directly ourselves. So what I did was I found an organ of the party called the Central Executive Committee, the All-Russian Central Executive Committee, and I've got this for you over here to my right. So this is a book that was published in 1918, but it is recording the minutes of meetings that occurred in October 27th, I believe, 1917. So this is right at the moment in which the revolution is occurring. So you would presume that the people who are listed as holding the leadership roles at this moment are the important people in the Bolshevik Party. So this is the document right here to my right, and if you ask me, I'll give you the link to where you can find this. It's freely available, of course. Okay, let me blow this up. Okay, so I'm going to read to you a short translation of what this document says. Okay. It says, minutes of the meeting of the All-Russia Central Executive Committee of the Soviets of Workers, Soldiers, Peasants, and Cossack Deputies, Second Convocation, October 27th to December 29th, 1917. So this is the period in which the Bolsheviks take power. Minutes of the All-Russian Central Executive Committee, etc., 192 pages, official record, blah, 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 blah. So it's printed in 1918. Okay, now what you're going to see over here, let me blow it up a little bit more. You see these numbers? It says 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, etc., all the way down to 60. So these are the people who were elected to be the committee members. What I did was I went down this list, all 60 of them, went down all 60 people in the list to try to find out who they are. Now, it was very difficult. It's very difficult because I'm not a Russian historian. I can read this stuff and I can translate it with some help, but it's not easy going. But what I've done is I've been able to get identities for 44 of these 60 people. I have been scrupulous if I'm not sure who someone is to leave them out. So that's why we've got 16 people that we don't know who they are. The reason we don't know who they are is some of these people were using pseudonyms or noms de guerre. Some people had been using pseudonyms but then dropped them by this point because now they're feeling comfortable enough to use their real name. A lot of people, let's say for example, Leon Trotsky you might have heard of course. His real last name was Bronstein, okay? So this is known to be a Jewish thing, Jewish revolutionaries hiding their Jewish name behind a Russian name. But what I found out looking at this stuff is that it's not only Jews that did it, it was all sorts of people. I think what they were doing was trying to hide from the Russian Secret Service, the Russian intelligence services. So if you're a Jew, you want to pick a Russian name, and if you're a Russian and you're trying to hide, you want to pick a different Russian name. So that's what these guys were doing. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to start at number 1, and I'm going to tell you who these people are and what their ethnic background is if I could find it. Okay, the first one is Lev Kamenev. Lev Kamenev's real name was Lev Rosenfeld. His father was a Jew and his mother was an Orthodox. He was not raised religious, but he had a Jewish father, and he married a Jewish woman that was either Zinoviev's sister or Trotsky's sister or something like that. Number 2 is Lunacharsky. That's Anatoly Vasilyevich Lunacharsky. He was either a Russian or a Ukrainian. The third one is Avanesov. That's Varlam Alexandrovich Avanesov. He was an Armenian. The fourth one is Peter Stuchka. He was Latvian. The fifth one is Berezin, and his name was Yakov Davidovich Berezin. He was Jewish as well. The sixth one, this is the nom de guerre stuff I was talking about. It says Ulyanov. Well, that's Lenin's real name, Vladimir Ilyich Ulyanov. So he's not writing himself down as Lenin, he's writing himself down as Ulyanov. So like I said, sometimes they keep their nom de guerre, sometimes they don't. Number 7 is Kulachenko. That's Yakov Ivanovich Kulachenko. He's Ukrainian. The 8th one is, this was very difficult. It's written as A.A. Zvezdov, and this guy was mentioned as going out to the Kazakhs at one point in a historical document, but I couldn't find anything else on him. I think it may be mistranscribed, and it might actually be Andrei Alexandrovich Zdanov, not Zvezdov. So anyhow, if that is him, he's a Russian, but otherwise we don't know who he is. Number 9 is Litvin. His real name, of course, was Meir Henok Volok Finkelstein. He was Jewish. Number 10 is Vasilyev. This could be Joseph Stalin, or it could be Mikhail Mikhailovich Vasilyev. We really don't know. So this person is either a Russian or a Georgian. Number 11 is Meyerov, and I couldn't find out who it is. It's either a German name or a Jewish name, and we don't know. I was unable to find out definitively who this person is, so we're just going to leave it off. Number 12 is Peters. That's Yakov Christoforich Peters. He was a Latvian. 13 is Avel Safronovich Yanukizde. He's a Georgian. Number 14 is Strutin. It's unknown. We don't know who this is. Number 5 is Pavel Bibikov, and I couldn't find out who he is either. 16 is Vatin. That is the real name of a guy who was previously calling himself Bystryansky. He would be more popularly known as Bystryansky. Vadim Alexandrovich, but his real name was Vatin, and he was a Russian. 17 is Boris Fomin. He was a Russian. 16 is Franciszek, and I'm sorry, the Polish names are too difficult. Gerstelzak, I don't know. He's a Pole. Number 19, 20, 21, and 22, I couldn't find out any kind of background on these people. We've got V. Kajura. We don't know what he is. Pieter Melkov. We don't know what he is. Sakharov. We don't know who that is. And then A. Galkin. We don't know who that is either. 23 is Moiseev, and you may think that sounds like a Jewish name, but apparently there's a lot of people in Russia with this last name who aren't Jewish. Alexei Sergeyevich Moiseev is, I think, who it most likely is. 24 is Zak. I think it might be Samuel Zak, but I'm not really sure. All of the Zaks that I could find were all Jewish, so we're going to count that one as Jewish, even though we really don't know exactly who it is. 25 is Sagarashvili. It's David Sagarashvili. He was a Georgian. 26 is Zelensky. That's Isaac Abramovich Zelensky. He was Jewish. 27 is A. Kalatayev. We don't know who that is, but all the Kalatayevs I found were Kazakh, so I think he's probably a Kazakh. 28 is M. Levin. This is Mikhail Abramovich Levinson. He was Jewish. 29 is Kramerov, Grigory Moiseyevich Kramerov. He was Jewish. 30 is Nitkin, Alexander Nikitich Nitkin. He was a Chuvash, which is one of the smaller ethnic groups in Russia, indigenous ethnic groups. 31 is Gillerson. That's Arnold Isidorovich Gillerson. He was Jewish. 32 is Kirichenko, Alexei Petrovich Kirichenko. He was Russian. 33 is something like Kachevyeki. I couldn't find this name, and it's partially illegible, so we had to leave this one off. We don't know who this is. 34 is Volodarsky, whose real name was Moisey Goldstein. He was Jewish. 35 is Yevseyev. That's Dmitry Gavrilovich Yevseyev. He was a Russian. 36 is Buryaev. He was probably a Bashkir, which is one of the Central Asian ethnic groups, or I guess like related to a Tatar or something, but we don't know who that is. 37 is Venter. Venter was the nom de guerre of Leonid Borisovich Krasin, and he was Russian. 38 is Linnea, and I have no idea who that is. Couldn't find out. 39, of course, is Yakov Sverdlov. He's Jewish. 40 is Podvoisky. He was an early Ukrainian military commander. I think he's actually the guy who stormed the Winter Palace. If you've ever seen Sergei Eisenstein's film in which that happens, that's a fictionalized account of what Podvoisky actually did. So he was a Ukrainian, and he didn't play any role after that. Even though he was involved in one of the critical parts of it, he didn't have any role afterwards. 41 is Smolyaninov, V.A. Smolyaninov. I couldn't find any background information on him, but I know who it is. It's V.A. Smolyaninov. 42 is Oritsky. He was Jewish. 43 is, let's see here, David Schimka Zelman Berovich Goldenda. He was Jewish. 44 is Martin Ivanovich Latsis. He was a Latvian. 45 is another Latvian named Peterson. 46 is Matvey Muranov. He's a Ukrainian. 47 is the left SR leader, Maria Spiridonovna, who's written down here as Spiro. This was difficult for me to find. She was Russian. Her husband will be also a little bit further down the list. Let's see. Okay. 48 is Pavel Petrovich Malinovsky. I couldn't find definite information on him, but I'm pretty sure that he's Jewish, but we couldn't find out for sure. 49 is Vasilyok. This person's a mystery. It's a nom de guerre. I couldn't find any information on who this might really be. 50 is Grenievich. Andrei Vladimirovich Grenievich. He's a Ukrainian. 51 is Mikhail Lashevich, whose real name was Gaskovich, and he was Jewish. 52 is Pyotr Antonovich Zalutsky. We don't know what he is. He's probably a Russian, but I couldn't find information on him. 53 is Abram Aronovich Slutsky. Slutsky was Jewish. 54 is Steklov, whose real name was Oshvei Moiseyevich Nakamkis. He was a Jew, of course. 55 is Myrov. Myrov was a Russian, and he was married to Maria Spiridonovna. His name was Ilya Andreevich Myrov. 56 is Karelin. That's Apollon Andreevich Karelin. 57 is Prosh Perchevich Prosyan. He was an Armenian. 58 is a nom de guerre named Olich, which I couldn't find. I couldn't get anywhere with that. Olich. 59 is it's written down as Malkin, but it's actually Nikolai Grigorievich Markin, who was a Russian. And then 60, what it's written down as Bukhartsev, and couldn't make any headway with that either. So these are the 60 people of which I was able to find out who about 44, 45 of them were. So on the basis of that, I'm going to tell you what the breakdown of these numbers is. I grouped Russians and Ukrainians into one category, but if you broke them out, I think there's 4 or 5 Ukrainians on here, and the rest of them would be Russians. So we've got about 17 or 18 people that are either Russian or Ukrainian, with about 4 or 5 being Ukrainian. That's the modal category if you group them together in one group. If you break them apart, then the modal category becomes Jews. There's about 14, 15, or 16 people on here who were Jews. So what we're looking at, let's say we got 45 people, right? We've got somewhere about 15 to 17 people who are Russian or Ukrainian, and then we've got 14 to 16 people who are Jewish. So, and then that leaves another 15 people who are either Armenians, Georgians, Latvians, Poles, Kazakhs, Chuvash, or whatever, another small ethnic group. Bashkir was another one. So the party, at least the people that we can find out who they are most likely with a good degree of confidence, it's a third Jewish, a third Russian or Ukrainian, and then a third everything else. This means that the far right people who say that the Bolshevik movement was entirely Jewish, it doesn't look like it from this, okay? And it also means that the people who are contra anti-Semitism and contra basically just the people who are defending the Jews against these charges are being extremely dishonest if they say that the Jewish involvement in the Bolshevik movement was somewhere between 1.5% and 6%. This is the absolute core of the movement. These people were all important for the most part. There's a few who were thrown on here, especially people that we can't figure out who they are. These are just like they added a sailor, or they added a peasant, or they added a worker or something. These weren't political people. They were just invited to sit, or they were elected to sit to represent the interest of their class. But of the political people, the Jews are representing somewhere between 30 and 40% of the core of the movement. Now, another thing that I'd like to go through is this very briefly is the Central Committee of the Bolsheviks. So these are the names that you would recognize as being some of the most important people in Russian communism and in the Bolshevik movement. So there's 13 of them here. This is the Central Committee of the Bolsheviks in 1917. I'm going to go through them first, and then we'll talk about their ethnic affiliation. Vladimir Lenin, Leon Trotsky, Lev Kamenev, Vladimir Milyutin, Alexei Rykov, Grigory Sokolnikov, Adolf Yaffe, Felix Dzerzhinsky, Winter, Alexandra Kollontai, Yakov Sverdlov, Andrei Bubnov, and Moisey Uritsky. So after we change their names to their real names and we get rid of the nom de guerres, it becomes a little bit clear. Winter, like I said, is Leonid Borisovich Krasin. He's a Russian. Grigory Sokolnikov, his real name is Gersh Yankelevich Brilliant. Brilliant meaning like diamond. So, I don't know. We've got some people. Jared Diamond, for instance, who wrote that book. So that's basically the same name, Brilliant. It's just translated into Russian. Lev Kamenev, of course, Rosenfeld, Leon Trotsky, Bronstein. So in this group, we have 6 Russians. That's going to be Vladimir Lenin, who his ethnic background is completely mixed. Lenin is something like a quarter Jewish, a quarter German, a quarter Chuvash, and a quarter Great Russian. So he's just completely mixed. And the traditional Russian way to deal with people like that who are racially mixed is you count them as Russian if they're a part of Russian society. So they don't have the blood thing. They just have like the cultural understanding of it. If you're a part of Russian society and you're ethnically or racially mixed, then you get counted as a Russian. So we'll say that Lenin is Russian. Vladimir Milyutin is Russian. Alexei Rykov is Russian. Leonid Borisovich Krasin, alias Winter, he's Russian. Alexandra Kollontai is Russian, and so is Andrei Bubnov. So that gives us 6 Russians out of the 13 members. Now, we also have Felix Dzerzhinsky, who's a Pole. So now that's 6 Russians and 1 Pole. We've got 6 members left. They're all Jewish. So Leon Trotsky, or Leon Bronstein, Lev Rosenfeld, Gersh Yankelevich Brilliant, Adolf Yaffe, Yakov Sverdlov, and Moisey Uritsky. So the Central Committee of the Bolsheviks shows the exact same pattern that the Central Executive Committee, the 60-member body that we were talking about before, in which you've got a balancing act where it's half ethnic Russian or Ukrainian and then half Jewish. What this Central Committee of the Bolsheviks doesn't have is the third part, which is people of all the other different ethnicities of the empire, like the Latvians, Finns, Finns, Estonians, Lithuanians, Central Asians, and all the other types of people. So none of those are on here. It's just Russians and Jews, and then the one Pole. So what I also would like to read to you is part of a book by George Kennan. And this is actually where I got the idea to do this. I was reading this book by George Kennan, page 154. It's called Russia and the West under Lenin and Stalin. He's talking about Rosa Luxemburg and about how she was born in Poland or Russia, and then she was a socialist, and that she was a Jew, and that she moved to Germany. He said, these were, for the most part, people from the so-called Jewish Pale, which extended along the western border of the Russian Empire, and to which a large portion of the Russian Jewry was confined. It was in large measure the discrimination against Jews in the empire which had driven so many of them into the ranks of the revolutionary movement. So that's a thesis that you will often find in Jewish historiography, because there's no way that Jews would become revolutionary unless they had good reason, right? Okay. So anyhow, he's quoting the typical line on this stuff. And these Jewish revolutionaries included many remarkable and talented people. So he's giving them an out for their revolutionary behavior and complimenting them on how intelligent they were. Okay. Now here's the important part for our purposes. About half of the Russian Social Democratic Party, so that's the group that split into the Bolsheviks and the Mensheviks. Prior to the split, they're all part of that party, and even after the split, I think they were still part of it together. They just didn't agree. About half of the Russian Social Democratic Party was drawn from this source. This source refers to the Russian Jewry that lived in the Pale. So what he's telling us here is that half of the party, half of the weight of the party was in the Jewish ethnic group, and that's exactly what we find on the Central Committee of the Bolsheviks, in which it's half Jewish, half Russian, and that's what we find on the Central Executive Committee. So all this is 1917 again. It's all 1917. That's what we find, in which for every Russian on the Central Executive Committee, there's also a Jew. In that case, then there's also one person from a group who's not either of those. Another thing that I'd like to bring up quickly is also from this book on page 244. He says, let us recall to mind at this point the duality that marked the Bolshevik faction as a whole. The Bolsheviki as a political entity embraced two disparate wings. Abroad, in the immigration, there was what I might call, if I may use a sort of Freudian and sociological term, he doesn't even know what he's saying here, but he's too right. The cosmopolitan legitimate wing of the party. The cosmopolitan because it was composed of people who were citizens, not exactly of the world, but at least of the world socialist movement, international socialists, at home in a number of languages and countries, and trained to view the cause of socialism as an international one, in which Russia took by no means the place of first importance. So, and then he says that even though they said they hated the bourgeoisie, they often, had money and took on bourgeois pretensions. So that's one half of the split in the Bolshevik group, in the Bolshevik ideology. The other half, he says, is the criminal defiant part. And these are people who stayed in Russia, who did not go abroad, and were not from highly educated backgrounds, had not traveled, could not speak multiple languages, and did not have friends overseas. And it's pretty clear, if you know the background, that he's talking about the first group. Those are the Jews. This is the Jewish part of things. They had connections in Central and Western Europe. They had perhaps sometimes family over there. And if they were exiled, then they escaped. They left the country and went over there. This is what happened to Leon Trotsky. This is what happened to Lenin. And they found all their friends over there. So I think for me, this question is settled once and for all. If somebody tells you that the Bolshevik Party was, for example, 75% Jewish or 90% Jewish or something like that, I don't know where they could be getting it from. I've seen some people say that you could go down the list of all these commissars, all the people who were doing the dirty work, and they were all Jewish. I think Solzhenitsyn says that, for instance. But I have absolutely no way to find that out and verify it myself, and I don't know how you could. It's difficult enough trying to figure out who these 60 people are in the Central Executive Committee to find out their backgrounds with some kind of certainty. Very difficult business. So I don't know how it could be done for looking through lower ranks of people on whom very little has been written. But this certainly, should tell you that on the other side of the debate, the people who say that the Bolshevik Party was no more Jewish than Russia as a whole, that's wrong. That's completely wrong. Couldn't be further from the truth, in fact. It doesn't even represent Petersburg. The whole point of having the Pale of Jewish settlement was to keep Jews out of Petersburg. So this kind of this Bolshevik Party might represent some sort of hinterland in Belarus, some poor area where there was a village, a village of Hasidic Jews, and then a village of ethnic Russians or Belarusians or Ukrainians nearby. But that is not at all the environment in which the Bolshevik Party formed. It formed amongst educated, middle class, urbanites or semi-rural people who developed this revolutionary movement. And if you look at it, it's half Jewish and it's half Russian/Ukrainian, and then there's a few scattered people from all the other ethnic groups thrown in. All right, well, that's about all I have to say about it. If you have any criticism of this method or any additional information that you would like to add, please do so. As far as writing comments below, please don't write anything that would get us flagged by YouTube. Don't go overboard. Any kind of normal criticism is fine with that. Just don't go overboard, because this kind of topic and this kind of stuff is something that a lot of people look at very closely in order to keep us from discussing it at all in a reasonable and historically grounded way. So thank you for your time.